We hear it every day. Why aren't Muslims speaking up against terrorism? Better yet, they say, where are the peaceful, moderate Muslims denouncing ISIS? Yet the very people asking these questions tend to ignore a major fact. Muslims are the primary victims of terrorism driven by Wahhabism, an extremist, politically motivated perversion of Islam that is held by groups like ISIS. From 2007 to 2011, 97% of terrorism-related fatalities were actually Muslims, according to the U.S. National Counterterrorism Center. And the United Nations found that from January 2014 to October of the following year, nearly 20,000 civilians were killed in Iraq, a country that is 99% Muslim, many of the victims of ISIS. Still, the UN says its figures likely fall short because they don't include casualties resulting from the secondary effects of violence, like how many people are dying because they don't have access to food, water, or medicine, which are also directly caused by groups like ISIS. Ultimately, no one wants to see ISIS defeated more than Muslims. Yet so-called experts, those who claim terrorism is a tenet of the Islamic faith, disregard the victims through a very Orientalist generalization. Muslims have been killing each other for thousands of years, they say. Let them kill each other, they add. This civilization of jihad caricature has been carefully manufactured by those on the right in both media and government within neoconservative circles who profit from war. And while it might be the political bread and butter of the right, the left has folks like Bill Maher, who has made associating Islam with violence, barbarism, and female oppression a hallmark of his career. But somewhere in the stream of Islamophobic sentiment flowing from both sides of the aisle, they managed to get one thing right. Muslims have long been victim of extremist violence perpetrated by those who claim to share their faith. In fact, Muslims by the millions have participated in an annual march in Karbala, Iraq for the past 1,300 years to denounce just that. The 40-day religious commemoration known as Arba'in, the Arabic word meaning 40, culminates in the largest peaceful gathering of humans in the world. And for many Muslims, it's steeped in a spirit of resistance. It's rooted in mourning the death of the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad, who died at the hands of the ISIS of his time. Now, with attacks on the pilgrims by ISIS and other terror groups becoming both frequent and deadly, this spirit of resistance has taken on particular significance in recent years. Now, when someone asks, where are the Muslims denouncing ISIS? Well, they should be advised to look no further than the 20 million people who risked their lives to commemorate Arba'in in Karbala this year. But if you think the mainstream media would cover this as an important story, think again. In fact, outlets like Buzzfeed went as far as to accuse anyone saying the march was against ISIS as spreading fake news. Now, earlier this month, Mint Press republished an article from the American Herald Tribune, headlined "Media Blackout: Millions of Muslims March Against ISIS." The story explained the history of the annual pilgrimage, noting that millions of Muslims continue to make this journey despite the threat posed by terrorists like ISIS. It quickly went viral, eventually becoming a trending topic on Facebook. Now, Muslims, for once, were shown in an honest, positive light, which is a rare occurrence in the mainstream media. Now, the narrative in this story challenged the establishment's carefully crafted sectarian, violent jihadi culture caricature, a falsification used to justify those endless wars in the Middle East and Africa. And it's a vicious cycle. These endless wars, supposedly meant to target terrorists, actually give rise to the terrorism that Muslims become victim to. Of course, it wasn't long before the mainstream media chimed in. Buzzfeed did what it's been doing best lately. It bent a positive story showing Muslims united in a force of peaceful resistance against terrorism to parrot Cold War rhetoric. Buzzfeed dismissed it as just another false story that should have never gone viral. The story's author, Craig Silverman, argued that the headline was misleading. The march was not, in fact, organized in direct response to ISIS. And citing reports from the Washington Post and the International Business Times, he argued that there wasn't even a media blackout. He even went on to say that it was just Russian propaganda, since RT was the only outlet that reported the march's connection to being resistance against ISIS. Ultimately, Mr. Silverman used the story and Mint Press's decision to reprint it as an example of why Facebook needs to be more cautious about what appears in its trending section. Yet much of his proof lies in reports by mainstream media outlets that can't even differentiate between ISIS-inspired terrorism and Islam, which ultimately helps push those foreign wars and funneling weapons to extremist rebel forces that leads to more terrorism that Mr. Silverman seems to support. In attempting to address the spread of misinformation plaguing Facebook, Buzzfeed missed the point at the heart of the story. Participating in the Arba'in March is marching against ISIS. Now, for those claiming this is a false story, well, here's a little history lesson for you. Arba'in pays tribute to the sacrifices of Hussein ibn Ali, or also known as Imam Hussein, the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad. Now, he and his followers were massacred in 680 by the tyrant or ISIS of their time, Yazid ibn Muawiyah. An influential ruler from the Umayyad dynasty, Yazid ruled over many parts of the Middle East with an iron fist as he established his so-called caliphate. Now, he descended from the 1% that ruled Arabia when the Prophet Muhammad revealed his message that challenged the economic heavyweights who profited from exploiting the impoverished population. Now, generations of that 1% carried on these attempts to silence and undermine the Prophet Muhammad, his family, and his followers. Now, Hussein repeatedly refused to pledge allegiance to Yazid, a power-hungry tyrant who represented the antithesis of Muhammad's message. And this refusal eventually led to a standoff between Yazid's 50,000-man army and Hussein and his 72 family members in Karbala. Even in the face of certain death, Hussein refused to fight and refused to back down even while he and his family members were being relentlessly attacked. His refusal to accept oppression and tyranny echoes even today as an example of nonviolent resistance against tyranny that is recognized by revolutionary leaders like Gandhi. And because groups like ISIS take their lessons from tyrannical leaders like Yazid instead of Hussein, this annual march in Karbala remains a symbol of the Muslim struggle against those who purport to use their faith in the pursuit of wealth, power, and colonialism. While Arba'in is a religious procession that's considered a Shiite Muslim event, it's pluralistic in nature. Sunni Muslims, as well as Jewish and Christian leaders, also take part in the march in a show of solidarity against injustice. It's honoring the legacy of a man who died hundreds of years ago when he wouldn't kowtow to the same brand of tyranny that ISIS wants to inflict upon Muslims today. So, Mr. Silverman and Buzzfeed, marching in Arba'in is taking a stand against ISIS and terrorism. It's refusing to live in fear, and it's denouncing everything that ISIS stands for and celebrating everything that ISIS hates most. Now, that's a real news history lesson worth sharing.